was just a form of music that we thought was stupid. We mocked it, we made fun of it, and we blew it up.
I loathed it then, and I loathe it now.
I discoed a couple of times with my wife.
I like the beat. I gave it a 7.
Steve Dahl said this is the end of disco, and so everyone went along with him.
This is now officially the world's largest anti-disco rally.
You bring a disco record, and you get in, and then we'll blow up the records between the double headers.
What is this? The guy's got an army helmet on?
Disco sucks!
I had no idea what to expect.
Holy cow!
It was the ultimate tailgate party.
It was mob out of control.
There are now, I'd say, 10,000 people on that field.
This is a flash bulletin. Hey, they weren't baseball fans.
I guarantee you there were 60,000 people in that building.
Can you hear me out there?
These LPs start crashing down.
They were just slinging them out. They're big records.
I thought the whole place was coming down. I really did.
The White Sox may have to forfeit the second game.
You couldn't really make something like that up. Who would believe it?
Everybody, a lot of room for you in the stand.
It certainly became the stuff of rock and roll legend.
Boy, oh boy.
Steve's plungering of the disco records in the mind of rock and rollers killed disco forever. It was a celebration.
Burn, baby, burn. Disco burn the moon down. That burn up real
good. It was the summer of 1979 in Chicago. Vinyl ruled. Record players were cool. And the hits that dominated the charts were from a genre complete with its own cultural calling cards.
John Travolta epitomized, the disco craze in Saturday Night Fever. And if you think about the clubs that were around back then in Chicago, you had to dress up and have the wide lapels and the nice clothes and the nice shoes and the good haircut.
I was kind of into disco. I was doing bad polyester open shirts and, tight bell-bottoms. And I was John Travolta. I was eating with a plastic bib, Hey, don't touch the hair.
I think the disco movement was designed by the fact that in the 70s, absolutely nobody looked good. It was polyester. It was platform shoes. It was overindulgence. It was a lot of fun.
Disco was fun for many, but tiresome for a number of Chicagoans who rejected the disco culture.
Well, I couldn't stand it. And it wasn't so much the music, which was really bad, but it was the lifestyle that was being forced down your throat along with it. That you had to wear your three-piece suits, you had to dance, you had to do all of this stuff, and it was kind of being forced upon you.
This disco stuff was crap. I mean, you had to, and if you were single and if you wanted to meet a girl, you had to go to a discotheque. You really did. And I hated it, having to listen to the Bee Gees and Donna Summer. It wasn't my kind of music.
I spent 6 months in the sanitarium. If I was a disco fan, I'd have to go back for treatment.
All of us rock and rollers hated disco. We just hated the lifestyle. We were rock and rollers. And, we were black and white jackets, and none of us wore things around our neck, gold chains or white leisure suits, and that's what the image of disco was back then.
If you look at the charts for 1979, the #1 song for the year on the Billboard charts was My Sharona. But #1 for 5 weeks was Bad Girls by Donna Summer. And, I think that's sort of the conflict that was going on there.
There was, as a matter of fact, some animosity between the two different types of music because they were pretty much two different cultures.
Steve Dahl, a native of Pasadena, California, was the first to tap into this cultural divide. At the tender age of 24, Chicago's WDAI plucked him from Detroit, where he had established himself. But less than a year later, WDAI switched formats to disco, and Dahl rebelled. He headed for the loop.
When I quit at WDAI, it was natural for me to start making fun of the place that I worked at before. And I instantly tapped into this whole anti-disco mentality. I mean, I really was just making fun of my bosses and the people that I worked for, and I guess the format to some extent because, you know, it was fairly lame.
He hit a chord. He was with a lot of people because he had he was a common, ordinary guy in a certain sense. You know, he spoke his mind. He was honest and truthful about what he felt, and he brought that to the forefront of radio before many people did.
I knew that Dahl had come from Detroit. I knew that he had a pretty hip thing going, casting himself in the mold of kind of a WWE wrestler where he was very anti-establishment.
Back then, he was so different from anything that we had ever heard on the radio. He was just attacking all these Chicago icons, and it was just a different kind of talk radio. It was more talk radio for teenagers and, you know, young people, and I don't think Chicago had ever had anyone like that before.
Back in 1979, The Loop was the kingpin of rock and roll radio for not only Chicago, for the entire country. We were a powerful radio station. Powerful.
They were at the forefront of playing music that most stations didn't play, and the jocks were so real, and they knew their music, and they were allowed to play the records they wanted to play, so they had influence.
Just sitting there with Steve for 15, 20 minutes, you knew it was right. You knew it was right to have him be the anchor of this radio station with the subtitle, Where Chicago Rocks, and that's what we did. We were the radio station where Chicago rocked, and if you didn't listen to us, you didn't rock.
I had Luke t-shirts, I had hats. I was an enigma in my neighborhood because I was like one of the only brothers that listened to rock and roll. So I listened to Steve. I listened to the Loop all the time.
I remember when I was working at Channel 5 years ago doing a live report from Bears Camp in Platteville, and I had a Loop t-shirt on. They made me take it off. I was a big Loop freak.
The Loop paired Dahl with overnight DJ Gary Meyer, and the two rapidly capitalized on the loyalty of their listeners to create an anti-disco army.
It occurred to me that this anti-disco army had to have a name.
We thought, let's have a gang because there were some street gangs in Chicago that were getting a lot of attention for whatever reason, like they always do. And one of them was the Insane Unknowns,
which I thought was really kind of like the funniest street gang name I'd ever heard, with all due respect to the Insane Unknowns. And I just happened to be coming off of the Stevenson onto Lakeshore Drive where the Coho fleet was, and I just kind of put the Insane Coho, I don't know where Lips came from, probably the Rolling Stones.
So we were the Insane Coho Lips. We had a gang. It just started to evolve.
The whole military thing kind of took off from that.
That was Steve. He was the commander-in-arms of the Insane Coho Lips. Steve had a brand of pop. We had Coho Cola. If Steve wasn't there, they'd still be yelling, Coho, Coho.
And then we had these anti-disco cards, fan club cards. We said, if you want one, send in for it, and we'll send you one free of charge. Within about a week, we got 10,000 requests.
It was just for fun. It wasn't meant to be radical or violent. It was just meant to be stupid. And I guess, you know, I thought disco was kind of stupid, so I was fighting fire with fire. You know, stupidity versus stupidity.
In the late 70s, disco dominated the top spots on the Billboard charts, and even rock and roll artists were buying into the disco craze.
Almost everybody who was anywhere near the middle of the road went over there, you know, to the dark side. You know, they're in the business of making money, and that was where some of the money was.
The Rolling Stones' Miss You, that was basically a disco song because it came out in like one of those 8-minute disco formats. Rod Stewart had Do You Think I'm Sexy?
When we saw Rod Stewart doing it, to us that was kind of like, you know, this is the new Las Vegas sound that, you know, it's going to ruin all rock stars. Eventually they're going to get old and go do disco.
At the time, I was caught up in the fever, and so I wanted to make fun of somebody, some rocker that I had, you know, determined had sold out, so I went after Rod Stewart.
Do you think I'm disco? 'Cause I spent so much time blow drying out my hair. Do you think I'm disco? 'Cause I know the dance steps, learned them all at Fred Astaire.
Steve already had started his anti-disco stuff on the air. Blowing up disco records, he'd play, ooh, love to love you, baby, and then boom, you'd hear an explosion, a sound effect.
I'd run the needle across it a couple of times, which always sounded great on the air, and it's like, you know, when you hear that, you just, you know, you really have to pay attention.
Anytime you're ready.
Oh, that blowed up real good. Yeah, that blowed up real good. Look at that.
We were really onto something after we started blowing up those records in the morning. It just struck a nerve. The phones lit up. And then, on top of that, we would go to these various nightclubs around Chicago and have these anti-disco rallies.
We did 2 bar appearances, one in Hanover Park, and there must have been 2,500 people there, like, you know, spilling out of the bar into the parking lot. And then we did another appearance down at the Point East in Linwood.
It was a disco, and he had the army suit and the helmet and the Jeep and the whole deal, and he didn't blow up records. He broke them over his head, over his helmet, and it was pretty crazy.
Where they called the riot police. The police showed up with German Shepherds and sent everybody home. So I knew that it was popular enough to fill up a nightclub.
In December of 1975, baseball's masterful promoter, Bill Veeck, returned for a second stint as owner of the Chicago White Sox. Veeck's career marketing highlights included everything from sending the undersized Eddie Goodell to the plate, to luring fans with belly dancers, to installing an exploding scoreboard. This time around, Veeck handed the promotional reins to his son, Mike.
It was 1977, and we had done a disco dance contest when we lugged 20 or 25 dance platforms, you know, out onto the warning track and watched all these people get out there and do this. And after the promotion, which did work, giving the devil his due, we repaired to the old Miller's Pub, and bandied about was the idea of, you know, we ought to have a night for people who love rock and roll. We just left howling about the idea of one of these days we were going to have what we then referred to as an anti-disco night.
2 years and countless promotions later, the idea for an anti-disco night resurfaced.
Mike has had some zany promotions, even outdoing his father.
Mike was saying, Schwartzy, you got the greatest radio station in town. Everybody's talking about the Loop, and the team's not drawing anybody.
We were halfway through the season, and suddenly Dahl had become a real player.
We got to come up with something. We got to come up with something to get some notice, draw some people to the ballpark.
Jeff Schwartz called me very early one morning.
I'm sitting back, I'm racking my brain, and I go, you know what? You put in your exploding scoreboard. I got Steve in the morning blowing up disco records.
As soon as Dahl blew up the first disco record on the air, there was no choice about where to do it.
Mike Veeck approached us with his team night that he had there anyway at White Sox Park and said, how would you like to do a disco demolition night at White Sox Park? We thought, my God, can't get bigger than that. Let's try it. It'd be a lot of fun.
It was a good marriage, you know, and especially I thought it was pretty cool that it was second generation, you know, that Mike was involved too.
Boom. Disco Demolition was born.
I was on the air the morning of the 12th, and I was nervous. I had a big day because, you know, I had to put on the helmet and the jacket and go to Comiskey Park. And I really was expecting it to be like the most humiliating day of my life.
The deal was you bring a disco record and pay 98 cents because 98 was the frequency of the radio station. And you get in, and then we'll blow up the records between the doubleheaders that were scheduled between the White Sox and the Detroit Tigers.
It seemed hopeless to me because the place seemed so big. I mean, how could you ever fill it? And even if you had 5,000 more people show up to this event than would to a normal White Sox game, the place would still look empty.
The White Sox at that point were about 11 games out of first place, July 12th. You're thinking they're not going to make a run for it.
Back then the Sox were so bad, of course, that no one ever really went to the games, so sellouts were just very rare.
So we did the show that morning, pumping up, and come down to White Sox Park with your disco record and pay 98 cents and be part of this event.
Well, I was a vendor, and that night I was selling pop. And normally 4 hours before a game at Comiskey Park, especially in those days, you'd see nobody. But there was people all over the place milling around, trying to find tickets, and the atmosphere was already pretty nuts.
I went out on Shields Avenue, which is west of the ballpark, and these people came streaming in, literally by the thousands, from the north, from the parking lots, wherever they put their cars.
There were throngs, and I mean throngs of people walking from the train. And they're all carrying albums.
About 3 o'clock, it became apparent that we were going to have more people than we had anticipated. By that, I'm still thinking 35,000, because it was going to be a non-baseball crowd.
It was the ultimate tailgate party, and I don't think anybody was there to see the game.
There was an autograph signing booth somewhere, and myself and Lorelei, we signed autographs for a while, and then we were to go down and throw out the first pitch. The catcher, the White Sox catcher, was so smitten with her after he brought the ball back out to her that he ended up like hitting on her, and off they went back to the dugout or wherever, and I'm standing out there in the full, Army outfit with the ball and nobody to throw it to.
Dahl's insane Coho Lips army was in full force, but it was one of Chicago's most beloved icons who set the stage for this unforgettable night.
I remember talking to Harry before the game a little bit. He was always a fan of mine, as I was of his. And I recall as the first game progressed, watching the TV and hearing Harry kind of going like, whoa, something's happening here. This team night isn't normal.
That night, I was selling Upper Deck pop. And I had just graduated from high school. I bumped into my high school English teacher, and she was wearing a black leather halter top with a black leather miniskirt. And this, to me, signified that this was going to be a different kind of night.
We were there as Steve Dahl fans. We were radio fans. Everybody listened to Steve Dahl.
They went out of the way to do one of those to Mr. Steve Dahl. Give him a salute, because he was the commander of their army. They came there to salute him. Or as AC/DC would say, for those about to rock.
The park could hold about 51,000 semi-comfortably, but there were people standing everywhere. The standing room crowd must have been at least 15, maybe 20,000.
And sometime in the middle of the first game, they tore down this gate that was going to the upper deck, and they ran up the fire escapes. I don't know how many people, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 people. Whoever was outside ran up these fire escapes, these old cement fire escapes, and got into the upper deck. And there was no longer any room to move up there at all. And it was really actually pretty scary because the upper deck was shaking. There was way too many people up there.
By then we knew what we were dealing with, and I think that everybody was holding their breath.
I knew there was a problem when I went through the gates because they had stopped taking the records. So when people went through the gates, they had the records.
What happened, and promoters, people who sponsor giveaways at events, they have one rule, been standing forever. Don't give them anything they can throw.
There were people sailing albums like Frisbees throughout the game, game one, on the field. I'm looking over my shoulder and I'm thinking, if I catch one of these things in the neck, I may not get out of here.
I thought somebody might be decapitated because records are sharp. The edges, in those days.
I couldn't believe that somebody didn't get hit in the eye or somebody didn't get hurt because they were just slinging them out. And they're big records.
So the air would get under those things, and they were like Frisbees. And the players were very, very serious about avoiding injury because they thought, here we are to play a game, and these people are throwing phonograph records out there.
I guarantee you there were 60,000 people in that building. And I saw on the left field wall, they had the archways in left field. I saw them creating human chains, and they were crawling up each other's back and crawling in through the arches in left field to get in because they had shut off the gates. You could tell that they weren't all baseball fans because throughout the first game, those chants would break out of "Disco sucks, disco sucks."
The signage was most offensive to people. There were "Disco sucks" signs everywhere. We were a different society then. The TV cameras didn't know where to go.
In 1979, the term sucks was still considered obscene by some people.
A couple times I saw golf balls fly on the field. Somebody picked one up and it had "Disco Sucks" painted on it. Well, after a while, it was just a fiasco. I didn't even know if we'd ever get through the first game.
I was coming down from the suburbs, the northern suburbs, with a friend of mine. And our plan was to come down, get to the second half of the first game, and be there for between games and see the second game. We get to the ballpark, and it's surrounded by police officers on horseback in baby blue helmets. They're in riot gear. saying you can't go any further. And when a Chicago police officer in a baby blue helmet on horseback in riot gear tells you not to go any further, you don't go any further.
The Jeep, my Jeep, was waiting for us at 35th and Shields, and then we were going to go down 35th through the parking lot and then into center field and then come out through the gates in center field. But when I went out onto 35th Street, it was like Blade Runner. I mean, the entire street was packed with people and cops on horseback. And I mean, I guess that's when I really knew that, you know, this thing had gone beyond what I had ever dreamt that it would be.
Game ends. The players look thrilled to be getting off the field. They go running off, you know. Gate opens up. And it's deafening. And it's a visual thing that you can't imagine. We walk out on the field, and it was scary.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, here are Steve Dahl and Lorelei.
Just driving out through the gates at center field was quite a rush, you know, and we went around the warning track, and beers were, you know, people were throwing beers at me and cherry bombs.
People are screaming and throwing beer, and it's just nuts.
And, I mean, it was great. It was exciting. It was very gratifying and terrifying all at the same time.
You almost felt sort of like in the movies of the Roman gladiator. You see all of them sitting there, and then in the pit is just the lion and that one gladiator. You almost felt like you lost control.
When Steve walked out there, I thought, what is this? The guy's he's got an Army helmet on, but the atmosphere, which had been electric and had been nuts, went to total chaos.
We're here for the biggest anti-disco demolition in the world tonight. My name is Gary Meyer. Will you please welcome the Supreme Commander, Steve Dahl?
They gave me the microphone, and then I realized that because I'd been fearing this thing not going well for 6 weeks or whatever, I hadn't really ever taken the time to think of anything really clever to say. First off, don't scream, because you're talking into a microphone. But it was so loud, and it was just so crazy. I was, you know, I was overcome. I was swept up in the moment.
This is now officially the world's largest anti-disco rally.
Had a little shtickle about disco sucking. We did a disco sucks chant, and everybody got into that.
Disco sucks! Disco sucks! Disco sucks!
It was weird being out there because it was nothing any of us have ever experienced. Just said, okay, let's do this, blow up the records, and let's go home.
I wasn't a big fan of disco, but I didn't think it necessarily had to be demolished, but if that's what Mike, Veeck, and Dahl wanted to do, it was all right with me.
Well, listen, we took all the disco records that you brought tonight. We got them in a giant box, and we're going to blow them up real good.
This box was filled with thousands of records. They had so many records they stopped taking them at some point.
Listen, I've assessed the situation as a good commander always does, and there's no way I'm getting near that thing. So we have sent a coho, kamikaze, and demolition expert back there to pull the plunger. And what we'll do is we'll count to 3, and then we'll all go boom.
I met the pyro guy for the White Sox, and he seemed a little over the top.
1, 2, 3, boom! Here they go!
There's like a series of little explosions before the big one. And I thought the little ones were, I thought that was it. So I was like, oh, well, that's not so bad. And then there was the huge one.
The record's being blown up, phenomenal with a capital P.
They went some 200, 250 feet in the air. As far as it being a little extra oomph, we did everything like that. So, you know, hey, so it should have been a half a stick of dynamite.
Yeah! The Coho-Lips win again!
I mean, I guess at that point, that's when I really got caught up in it, because it was, you know, I mean, it's an explosion, it's people yelling and screaming and throwing things.
So everybody's cheering, and Steve did his anti-disco song, which was a parody of Rod Stewart's Do You Think I'm Sexy?
Do you think I'm disco? 'Cause I spent so much time blow drying out my hair. You like it? Do you think I'm disco? 'Cause I know the dance steps. Learn them all at Fred Astaire.
So he sang that, but still everybody's in their seat, and that was about it.
I recall being ushered back hurriedly back onto the Jeep and then doing another lap of the warning track.
As soon as we got on the Jeep, people started throwing various things out of the stands at us, and the driver just decided he wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible, so he just floored it.
And beers pouring down on us, and people were just in a frenzy at that point.
More than anything, I remember that final lap around there. I felt like you know, maybe I had made the wrong choice by coming here to Chicago. And then out through center field I went.
Comiskey had portable ticket booths outside that were rolled out. And back in those days, the ticket takers were older, you know, like my age now. Across a radio between games, after we had blown up the disco records, came a request for some off-duty coppers. The kids outside were shaking the portable booths. People were upset that they weren't going to get in. Ultimately, it was my decision. I made the mistake, and I said, well, we should move 10 or 15 or whatever the cops think's appropriate outside to take care of our people in the booth. Crowd control's a misnomer. If you and I leave tonight for a Rolling Stones concert and there are 20,000 people, there aren't 20,000 security people. Crowd control works because the crowd never thinks as one. Well, at this particular moment, the attention was focused on the field. People saw 10 or 15 or whatever the number was of coppers leaving the field to go cover the portable ticket booths. And for that one moment, more of the crowd was thinking of one as any other time that I've ever seen.
Detroit won the first game 4-1. Ken Kravick was the White Sox starting pitcher for the second game of the doubleheader.
As I actually got to the bullpen, started warming up, it got a little dangerous, and really it was a scary situation because if you recall at Old Comiskey Park, the bullpens were right next to the stands. So after warming up a couple minutes, we decided, well, let's go onto the main mound on the main field and try to finish our warm-ups.
Ken Kravick had taken the mound to throw some practice pitches, some warm-up pitches. And I could see the look on his face. He was in fear.
You could see that the crowd was a little crazy and starting to get out of hand because they were throwing fireworks over, from the upper deck, and the albums are coming out like frisbees.
It's kind of like when you put a teapot on top of a stove. You can kind of hear the rumbling. You can kind of feel the energy of something was going to happen.
You saw someone from right field climb over the wall and come down.
There were 4 more, 10 more, 50 more, 100 more.
It was like they opened the gates. It was like a jailbreak.
Oh, then I knew I was in trouble.
Jimmy Pearsall back in the ballpark, and I'm sure glad, and I hope they don't let you people see what's going on here at Comiskey Park. One of the saddest sights I've ever seen in a ballpark in my life. This garbage of demolishing a record has turned into a fiasco. My guest right now is Bill Gleason. And Bill, after all the years you've been in baseball, I know you haven't ever seen anything like this.
Nor has anyone else, except after the final game of a World Series in Shea Stadium.
These people had seen, after World Series, fans run out there and they start tearing up the turf because they want to take the grass, the field grass, home with them. And that's what happened. But these people forgot this was not in October, this was in July.
A lot of us, even the ones that were baseball fans, figured, we were in one of those dark ages of Chicago sports where we had never seen any championship or anything, so we thought maybe this was the only time we'd ever get on the field.
The crowd on the field that we now have was inevitable. Just watching, you could sense that they were going to break out, and all of the kids in the lower deck who want to go out will be out there now, and the White Sox may have to forfeit the second game.
There were some guys climbing the foul pole and shaking the foul pole, and that made the roof shake up there, too. I thought the whole place was coming down. I really did.
They were pulling up sod, trying to dig home plate up, trying to tear the pitcher's rubber out of the mound, and it was nuts.
There were actually a couple fans that somehow came down into the dugout, ran through the runway, and got into the clubhouse, and they had to escort them out.
And these goofs are knocking one another around, and kids were in serious danger. It just was horrifying.
I saw a couple having sex behind second base. You couldn't miss it.
July 1979, I was in Louisville, Kentucky, working there and trying desperately to get a job in Chicago. And for some reason, we had the Channel 44 feed of the Sox game coming into the station, and I'm watching this carnage. I'm watching this disco demolition night. It's crazy. And I said, that's why I want to work in Chicago.
While fans were storming the field, Dahl, Meyer, and Jeff Schwartz were outside the stadium, slowly making their way back to the press box, unaware of what was transpiring inside Comiskey Park.
The Jeep went out into the parking lot, and we didn't know what was going on until we got back up in the press box.
And I remember vividly walking by a television monitor. And I looked, and I looked again. And I thought there was something wrong with the monitor, because it was all blurry. Wasn't. It was thousands of people on the field. That was the first inclination I knew what happened.
I was shocked and amazed, I guess. And I knew I was in trouble, because somebody was going to pay for that somehow, some way, and I guess I just thought it would be me.
Surrealistic. Surrealistic. It was something out of a movie.
I certainly hope that there's an example being made here that something like this will never happen again, not only for this ballpark, but for all ballparks around the country.
For me, it was a sad thing to see, because the promotion had got out of hand because of a few fans, and all it takes is a few to start everybody else down the path that they had taken, which was to jump onto the field.
Now the whole thing is to avoid a riot, and I've been in a couple riots. I know the difference. You don't take out the nightsticks and you let them run. And that was the thing that happened that I think avoided a lot of trouble, is that basically we looked at the situation, we knew there were going to be 10,000 people on that field in a matter of moments, and we just let them come on.
The baseball is no longer the story, it's this crowd.
Yeah, you know,
taking over the ball.
You know, it's amazing. We got the greatest country in the world, but you know what? We have become followers. So many people insecure, don't know what to do with themselves and how to have a good time. They follow someone who's a jerk.
No, I don't think that Bill Gleason and Jimmy Pearsall were fair to me, and I think they're the ones that actually kind of gave people the false impression that I told people to storm the field, which I never did. You know, because they were talking about how these people follow a jerk, and Jimmy Pearsall said, I'd rather be swimming, which is a bit of an non sequitur, but whatever.
And they are just letting out all sorts of enjoyment that I don't know what's so happy about that. I would rather swim, or I'd rather do a lot of other things than just stand on a baseball field.
I'll never forget his one line, I'd rather be home swimming than doing this. Like that had anything to do with this.
I don't think that they did me any favors by saying that, but on the other hand, at the time, I mean, I suppose, you know, they kind of helped add to the legend.
Look what's happened now. They got the batting cage. They're running it around the outfield, a very expensive piece of merchandise that the players need every night to have batting practice.
It seemed like they were burning the batting cage, but I think all they were doing was jumping on the batting cage and crushing the heck out of it.
And now they're jumping all around it. I don't know what can be done here, except maybe they're going to have to call in a lot of policemen or something, because it's getting out of hand as far as things they're starting to do. I don't know how far...
The kids didn't start a fire in center field. The bonfire was a result of those albums, probably of our having too much charge in there, and obviously when they went up, some of them caught fire.
Somebody had brought a giant banner that said Disco Sucks, and so when people asked me where I was at Disco Demolition, I always tell them I was above the second S in Sucks, because that's exactly where I was. We had a bird's eye view of watching all this thing, and so people were starting to hurdle the bonfire out in the outfield.
It was kind of exciting in the clubhouse because everybody was just yelling, you know, hey, check this out, you know, we got to come down. So we had guys come down to the dugout with helmets on and bats in their hands just to see what was going on. And it got so crazy that they made us leave the dugout and go in the clubhouse and lock the door.
During the flurry of activity on the field, WSNS Channel 44 made a decision to stop broadcasting the scene to its Chicago audience, opting to cut away to alternative programming.
Eventually, Bill Veeck goes to the field, gets on the PA system, and is pleading with everyone to leave.
This is Bill Veeck. Please clear the park, or we'll have to call off the game and close the park. The television cameras are not on you, so please clear the field. Don't spoil the night for everybody else. Please clear the field so the ball fans can see a game.
These people weren't going anywhere. They were just all over the place.
My heart went out to Bill Veeck, Mike's dad, because Bill had come back to take on that franchise for a second time, his second administration. And he needed every good break he could get, and then this happened.
The thing is, Bill Veeck lived to fill that ballpark and you know, field a winning team, but fill the ballpark, give people a good time. And he filled it this time, and yet he filled it with a bunch of people who weren't baseball fans.
And the most futile thing, if you've seen the pictures, on the scoreboard, the sign said, "Please return to your seat." Well, a lot of good that did.
All right, let's clear the field. This is Bill Veeck. We will forfeit the game if you don't clear the field.
Soxogram had "Please return to your seats," which is one of the things that I look at in later years, and I just think to myself, that's funny. That has potential.
A lot of fans trying to get in the dugout here, the White Sox dugout, but they've got security guards around it. But it's a long night. I don't think there's possibly be a chance to play.
Let's see, you got everything here. You got drunk people, you got fire, you've got a guy rallying them with like a helmet on the middle of the field. I really don't think it takes too much to put two and two together and figure out that it was just about releasing some tension and having a little bit of fun, and it got out of hand.
It was the wildest baseball scene. I've covered this game 26 years now, and nothing has topped it since.
To watch this thing unfold and then see everybody react the way they did was, we thought, kind of funny.
It just happened that these people were more interested in getting out on the field and saying, I ain't gonna come on the field. But I don't think that in the overall picture that any fan was very happy about it.
We were just laughing up in the stands for a while, and then we got mad because we wanted to see the second game and didn't want the Sox to lose. We lost enough games. We didn't need help by forfeiting because of what happened on there, but no clue what it was going to lead to.
I really didn't want to mess up the baseball game. I mean, I really didn't.
Now they're calling for Harry, and I certainly know that Harry will enjoy that, but I don't think he, too, would enjoy something like this going on. But as far as Harry goes, he gave it a shot, but I don't know how much he helped.
Holy cow! Can you hear me out there? Okay, to make it an absolutely perfect evening, what say we all regain our seats so we can play baseball again? Okay, everybody, let's go to our seats now. Okay.
Everyone loved Harry and Bill Veeck, but they certainly weren't ready to go back to their seats.
Come on, let's go. We want to win a game.
Then you started wishing that, okay, people get off the field. Be respectful. The White Sox are our friends.
Hey, give us a break and clear the field. All right, we've had the fun. Clear the field. Come on.
Mitch Michaels, a disc jockey at the Loop, joined Harry in the booth and pleaded for the fans to get off the field.
Back to your seats. Back to your seats.
There had to be over 10,000 people out on the streets that could hear the organ playing. Every time the organ played, the kids in the street would start chanting. And they weren't even in the stadium.
Back to your seats. Back to your seats. Back to your seats.
The chants were clearly not working, so organist Nancy Faust chimed in with a softer approach.
Hey! We don't want to have Luke responsible for forfeiting a game. Back to your seats now. Let's go. Lay up with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and cracker jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Go Bill Root. Root, root for the white. Come on now. Back to your seats. So we can play more. For it's everybody. 2, 3 strikes you out at the old ball game. Okay, let's start. Back to your seats. Let's start the game. Let's clear the field and start the game. Back to your seats. Come on, throw the toilet for everybody.
We asked if we should go down and try to help out, but we were told just to stay there because they were looking at us like, you guys are evil. You look what you've done to this ballpark. They said, just stay there.
I said that I would go on and try to get people off. They wouldn't let me. They said, you know, you've done enough. You just sit here. So, because I offered to do that, because it seemed to me that if anybody could have gotten them back in, it would have been me.
He couldn't have controlled it any better than any of the rest of us.
Please get off the field so we can start the second game.
If 2 of the giants of Chicago, in my dad and Harry, and I say that not as his kid, but as a guy, they gave it a shot, it wasn't going to happen.
Harry Carey back at Comiskey Park. The start of the second game has been delayed. They're having difficulty getting the fans off the field. Bill Veeck has been addressing the crowd, but there's still a burning ceremony going on out in center field. That's where they're burning up all the old records.
For nearly 37 minutes, fans had their run of the field. But when police entered the park, it came to an end, and quickly.
It's 1979, so, you know, the average kid that's there on the field has fresh memories of 1968 and the convention. So the Chicago Police Department had a reputation in those days. They still do. But as soon as the kids saw the police in riot gear, you know, visors and helmets and billy clubs, everybody just took off.
Now the police are out on the field. Boy, oh boy.
Very fascinating thing about it, the police, when they entered the field, when they came into the baseball diamond, they were applauded. Tremendous applause from the people who stayed in the stands and didn't want any part of that. So it was one of the rare times that the Chicago Police Department got a rousing ovation.
Within 3 minutes, the field was clear. But the status of Game 2 was still in question.
Don Kessinger was managing at the time for the White Sox, and Sparky Anderson. And I know from talking to Sparky, he said, I'm not sending my players back out there. That's what he told the umpire.
Sparky Anderson, he had a lot to do with this. They should rename the Tonys the Sparkies. He gave a performance that was world class.
The umpires had to call the game. Somebody stole home plate. The field was a mess, and Bill Veeck wanted it to continue.
Bill didn't have much of an argument because the field was unplayable. Because it would have been like playing in a park on asphalt.
Sparky Anderson won the debate. The game was canceled. The White Sox forfeited.
We were all happy to go home. It was a beautiful thing. We got the win and didn't have to play the game.
Well, they were teasing me because I was a starting pitcher. They were saying, hey, forfeit, you get the loss. I go, what?
After Bill Veeck's arguments to play Game 2 were officially put to rest, he addressed the crowd for the last time of the night.
Will you please all keep your rate checks, and we will advise you later what to do with them when we figure out ourselves. But please keep your rate checks. They will be good for another day.
I felt terrible. I mean, I understood, and not just by osmosis, that this was going to be a reflection on the guy running the club. It certainly, my dad had nothing to do with disco demolition. All he did was bear the brunt.
I had quit my job in December. I had just gotten a job at the Loop in March. And here it was July, and I felt I was going to be losing my job again. I felt like things were not going to go well for me, just based on how freaked out everybody was that this had happened.
The president of the radio station was there in the press box with us, and he was from Texas, and I remember these words distinctly. He looked at us and he said, "Be cool tomorrow. Whatever you do,"
he's from Texas,
"whatever you do, be cool tomorrow. Don't talk about this on the air." Meaning when you go back on the air tomorrow, make sure you handle this with some kind of care. Like, what are we going to do? I mean, come on, this is a big deal here. We have to talk about this and enjoy it.
So that was, I had that to chew on all night.
That night, Steve and I stayed at a hotel downtown, and we were looking at each other like, what just happened? Did you just see that? And we were watching the news going, this is insane.
It certainly didn't look at the end of that evening like it was going to be a warm and fuzzy. Thinking about it now and looking back 25 years later, it shows you how forgiving history can be and how unforgiving papers can be the next day.
It was just a terrible, terrible night. But it gave us a lot to write about, didn't it?
The newspapers called it a riot. I wouldn't say that it was a riot. I would say the majority of the kids that ran on the field were just there to have a good time.
That was the most dangerous, as I said before, the most dangerous promotion in the history of baseball promotion.
The next day when the Sun-Times and Gleason and Pearsall and numerous writers called it a horror show, called it a tragedy, you know, it was a forfeited ball game. You know, this is not the stuff that Shakespearean myths are made of.
Do I apologize for every White Sox fan that thought we did something wrong? Of course I have to, because you feel that I should. Did we do anything wrong to this date? Nope. I didn't see anybody getting hurt, and nobody did get hurt.
It was pretty intense the next day as far as what had happened, because it was obviously a major headline. And here we are on the center of it.
My next dilemma was, do I talk about it on the air and lose my job? Or do I not say anything, act like it never happened, keep my job, and lose all my credibility? I have to say, honestly, that I chose keep my job.
Good morning, Steve. Good morning. How's your throat? It's only about half here today. Whoa.
About 10 minutes into the show, I just couldn't do it, and I just, you know, unloaded.
You know, I went out to the ballpark last night and enjoyed a baseball game. Yeah, can you say bad coho lips?
Sure.
You maniacs. We were out in the middle of the field, of course, the world's largest disco demolition. We thought there'd be no problem. 67,000 insane coho lifts out there last night.
67,000. Do-do-do-do-do.
Do-do-do-do-do-do. It was you maniacs out on the field, jumping through bonfires. Oh, boy.
For me, that was a big turning point, you know, because I'd finally gotten all of the fan base that I dreamt of and the adulation that I wanted, and here I was at this moment where I had to choose, you know, job security or the fans, and I went with the fans, and as it turns out, that's the ultimate job security.
This garbage of demolishing a record has turned into a fiasco.
When we're talking about it 25 years later, it still has some weird little currency where people remember that night.
Oh, this by far is the wackiest promotion there ever was. There's nothing that comes close to this. And I've seen them all. And I've seen a lot of bad ones, mostly all bad ones. Nothing comes close to this.
I will always say and recite that it was the most successful promotion ever, which again is amazing to me that it happened with such great enthusiasm and such a great turnout.
I saw the Bee Gees on a VH1 special attributing the death of disco to disco demolition. I was not aware of any of that happening at the time. It was just a form of music that we thought was stupid and a lifestyle that we didn't want to be a part of and was somewhat threatening to us, and so we mocked it, we made fun of it, and we blew it up.
That was it. The bottom fell out. That was the stick a pin in it moment where it was done.
I never accepted Casey and the Sunshine Band and disco as a form of music. I loathed it then, and I loathe it now. I think from that standpoint, real music lovers all over the world, I should be knighted for my contributions.
I recall a couple of articles where people were talking about, you know, equating it with book burning and what have you, but I never really took any of that seriously because I knew that it was all meaningless. You know, it was just fun.
One of the things that I find amazing about the whole thing is the life of its own that it's taken. I heard an interview once where they determined that it was a homophobic promotion. Well, give me a break. Jeff Schwartz and Steve Dahl and a bunch of us sat down and said, let's have some fun for guys who like rock and roll and do it.
It was a horror. It was mob out of control. But with the passage of the years, the 25 years, it's become epic. It's become a moment, one of the really fascinating moments in the history of baseball. People will talk about it forever.
I think Chicago needed something like that to make it a little more vibrant. It was really conservative and stale at that point, so I think this really helped it.
My only regret is that I didn't have, like, funnier stuff to say and cooler stuff to say when I was on the field. You know, I have to live with that tape forever now, and every time I watch it, I cringe at, you know, some of the stupid stuff I said.
I wish that I had simply felt the pulse of the street. The day before, on July 11th, that yes, for July 12th, for this thing called, this amorphous, kind of not really certain what it is, hey, we're going to have 50,000 people in the ballpark. You'd have been laughed out of Chicago. But had we planned for that number, and there had been 200 coppers, I think it would have been fine. So, my regret, I made a mistake.
Mike, for a long time, agonized over it, as you know. He left the club and went out on his own, and his father was devastated by that. And I told him, Mike, you're responsible for something that will be remembered forever. Don't apologize for it. Take credit for it.
I remember talking to Bill Veeck at one point after everybody had been on the field and all of that, and he said to me, he said, you know what, kid, you really know how to bring them in, which I, you know, it was worth it just for that.
I'd quote a wonderful guy who's in the Hall of Fame, who was a magical man, and who happened to be, by mistake of genetics, my father. And he looked at me and he said, McGill, there are promotions that work too well. That's how I sum it up.
Much has changed in 25 years. Harry Carey died in 1998. Bill Veeck passed away in 1986. His son Mike is back in the game, owning a handful of minor league baseball teams. Steve and Gary eventually parted ways. Gary continued his career on the air. Jeff Schwartz took his rock and roll passion to WCKG, and that's where you can find Steve Dahl, who has been named as one of the 100 most important radio talk show hosts in America. But no matter where their careers take them, they will be forever bonded by a local promotion, remembered around the world.
We did something that should be time capsuled. It's part of Chicago folklore. It's part of baseball folklore. Ted Williams was on that field. Babe Ruth was on that field. Steve Dahl blew up disco records on that field.
To order a copy of the Disco Demolition 25th Anniversary DVD, which includes this program, go to discodemolition.com or call 1-800-237-1100.
Now, I don't know if anybody's told you this, but Alice Cooper was initially involved in this, either through Mike Veeck, as part of Teen Night or something, but he was initially asking if he could go down there and blow up the records. We said, no, 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 we've brought it to this point. You can't have that.
I had brought a little pint of Jack Daniels, so we just took it out and we were like taking shots in the dugout. And the Tigers coach, Alex Grammas, came out from the end of the dugout, came over, and it was just so matter of fact. Son, give me that bottle. So I said, oh, here, coach, here you go. And then he says, okay, son, now get out of our dugout, please.
I think there's a lot of posers out there, people that said they were there that weren't there, or said they went on the field and didn't go on the field. But when people hear that it was our first date, they really believe you, because who would make that up?
You have to go back to 1979 to appreciate the word suck. Because suck, back then, everything sucked. If you didn't like it, it sucked. It was a bummer. There was, your job sucked. If you said it was a bummer, then it sucked. And disco sucked.
I don't know, just one freaking crazy night. That's about it.
Burn, baby, burn.